My name's Charlotte. For nearly 4 years, I was the invisible backbone of a high-octane cybersecurity firm in Seattle. The kind of place where appearances mattered more than action, and buzzwords flew faster than bug fixes. I wasn't the one giving PowerPoint presentations or schmoozing clients. I was the one buried in code, quietly holding the system together when no one else even knew it was breaking. They called me the quiet one. I didn't mind. I preferred the hum of servers to the buzz of meetings. Every line of code I wrote was a safeguard. Every undocumented patch a lifeline for a system built on chaos masked as innovation. The firm worshipped speed, disruption, and synergy. What they ignored were the hairline fractures spreading across their infrastructure, cracks I lived in. I was never in the spotlight. But when things went south, it was always my keyboard they depended on. And then, after one sleepless night where I single-handedly saved the entire platform from collapse, they fired me. No warning, no handshake, just a sterile email at dawn. They thought they erased me. What they didn't know is my name was still on the root account. It started with a flicker, an anomaly so subtle most would miss it. But not Charlotte. At 4:13 p.m. on a cloudy Thursday, a single error pinged her dashboard. The kind of glitch you could easily blink past. But she didn't. Something in the pit of her stomach told her to dig deeper. And she did, because Charlotte knew this system better than she knew herself. She had built its bones, patched its bruises, learned to anticipate its silent cries for help. By 4:18, error messages were piling up like a dam breaking open. CPU usage spiked. The user API began timing out. Database queries hung in limbo. Then came the panicked messages. Is this global? Restart the cache. Clients are locked out. Who's running rollback? The internal chat lit up with emojis, half-baked ideas, and scatterbrained theories, but no one took charge. The leads, those who gave long speeches in all-hands meetings, vanished. The people who once shook her hand and called her mission critical were suddenly nowhere to be found. And Charlotte stayed, not because it was her job, not because anyone asked, but because if she didn't, the company would go dark by nightfall. 3 terminals open, 2 monitors stacked. Her fingers moved faster than her thoughts. Somewhere between the panic and the patching, Charlotte stopped reading the code and started feeling it, like a musician who knows the next note by heart. She predicted every failure, every cascading bug, every module buckling under the pressure. She remembered a patch she wrote 6 months ago, one no one else knew existed because the team never documented it. She traced the root of the memory leak through the tangle of microservices like a surgeon following a pulse. She rolled back bad deploys. She isolated the failing queue workers. She wrote new firewall rules from scratch, all while the office slowly emptied out around her. By 6:30 p.m., the open concept workspace was silent. The CTO sent out a vague Slack message, regrouping tomorrow. Great job, team. Charlotte didn't respond. She was already 10 steps ahead, building a temporary fix to bypass the corrupted authentication layer. By 9:30, the system was breathing again. Barely, but enough. No clients saw the dip. No headlines were written. No one outside that glass tower even knew how close they came to disaster. She leaned back in her chair, the room completely dark except for the glow of her screen. Coffee cold, hands stiff. She stared at the lines of code scrolling past like credits after a film no one stayed to watch. Her reflection in the glass was pale, tired, empty. She had done it, and the next morning, they erased her. At 7:08 a.m., Charlotte woke up on her couch still wearing her shoes. Her phone buzzed. 17 Slack notifications. 4 unread emails. 1 company-wide announcement from the CTO. Kudos to the team for staying calm under pressure. Special shout-out to Jason for stepping up during a critical moment. Jason, the same Jason who logged off before the real work began. Who reposted her bug report without lifting a finger. The thread below was full of laughing emojis and gifs calling him a legend. Not a single mention of her name. The silence wasn't just insulting. It was erasure. Intentional. Cold. Then came the next blow, an email. Misdirected by accident. Subject line. Phase 2. Payroll optimization candidates. Inside, it read, Low visibility roles. Non-client facing. Minimal disruption potential. It was clear, Charlotte wasn't cut because she failed. She was cut because she worked in the shadows. Because she wasn't loud. Because she was too damn good at being invisible. She stared at the screen. Something shifted in her chest. Not rage, not sadness. Something colder. She opened her laptop. To her surprise, her access was still active. Not just employee-level access. Root-level credentials. The kind that controlled everything. Her name was still listed on the master admin account. In the chaos, someone had forgotten to remove the one person who could truly pull the plug. And Charlotte didn't. She could have shut it down. Locked every port. Scrambled the cache. Crippled the infrastructure she once protected. But she didn't. Not because she wanted to be merciful. Not because she believed they deserved forgiveness. But because she wanted them to think they were safe. Only then, she thought, would they never see it coming. That same afternoon, she walked into the office one last time. The security guard nodded, clueless. The elevator dinged. The floor felt the same. She passed the break room. Laughter. Jason was there, handing out donuts. We saved the system, he declared to applause. No one even looked her way. She sat at her desk. Her computer still logged in. Her email still open. Her permissions still untouched. She didn't write code. She didn't respond to anyone. She just opened the system tree. She stared at the architecture. Her architecture. Every subsystem. Every backup patch. Every undocumented fix still running. Her legacy. Then she did one thing. Quietly. Intentionally. She encrypted a full system snapshot. Saved it onto a small white USB drive. Labeled it legacyroot.zip. She placed it in her coat pocket next to the envelope HR had handed her. Then she stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the city. The skyline she once dreamed would be her future. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She didn't make a scene. She just whispered to herself. They fired the wrong ghost. 3 days passed. Quietly. The company buzzed as usual. Zoom calls. Coffee runs. Empty jargon in stand-ups about alignment and scalability. On the surface, everything looked fine. Like the system hadn't come inches from total collapse the week before. Jason was now unofficially crowned hero of Q2. Even getting a mention on the company's intranet spotlight page. Charlotte's name was nowhere. She didn't check Slack anymore. Didn't refresh her inbox. But she still had access, not just to her old terminal, but to the core infrastructure. And every morning, while sipping tea by her apartment window, she logged in, quietly, not to break anything, just to watch. Then, on the 4th day, something happened. At 9:37 a.m., Ravi, a junior systems associate, noticed an odd glitch. The sync job for user profile metadata was repeating itself. At first, it duplicated 3 entries, then 5, then 12, then it skipped a sync cycle entirely. Ravi, still new and painfully polite, thought maybe he'd misconfigured something. He restarted the sync gateway. Nothing changed, so he dove into the logs. That's when he saw it, a script. Primitive, hand-rolled, buried deep inside the legacy patch directory. At the top, one comment, #temp hold, patch by CS. It wasn't part of the new codebase. It wasn't in Git. It wasn't tagged or documented. He asked around. No one knew what it was. No one even recognized the initials. Not until Marcy, the lead systems architect, overheard and quietly said, "CS, that's Charlotte Simmons." Ravi blinked. "She's the one they let go last week, right?" Marcy nodded. Slowly. "Yeah, she wrote that. She wrote a lot of things." They stared at the script. It was a patch holding together a sync bottleneck that had been quietly threatening system stability for months. A single, undocumented, brutal line of code, simple and elegant. One failure away from falling apart. And now, it was failing. Meanwhile, in a high-rise boardroom 2 floors up, the core team was preparing for a major Q3 pitch to Brightform Solutions. A client worth nearly $40 million a year. The demo had to be airtight. The dashboard fast, every API response flawless. But that morning, things began to falter. User dashboards returned white screens. KPIs refused to load. Background reports timed out. Jason barked orders like a general without a map. Restart the nodes. Flush the queues. Reindex the metrics layer. It didn't help. None of them knew the system well enough to trace the errors. Because the person who built the real safeguards, the silent patches, the asynchronous overrides, was no longer there. Across the building, Marcy was in a different kind of panic. She pulled Ravi into a quiet meeting room. Start digging. Look for anything with CS on it. Anything undocumented, especially older layers, monitoring agents, legacy workers. Kron. Ravi obeyed. And what he found shook them both. He uncovered dozens of silent fixes. Ghost patches. Code that ran outside the official repositories. All signed quietly in the comments. #CS. #tempfix. #manual override. #hold dash until dash Q3. Charlotte hadn't just saved the system once. She'd been holding it up in the background for nearly 2 years. Every time a critical process nearly failed, her work was there, unnoticed, undocumented, unfunded, just enough to keep the foundation from crumbling. And now, it was unraveling. That evening, Ravi sat in the empty break room, watching a blinking red error on his terminal. A permissions failure in a legacy API. The stack trace pointed to a root credential entry, still live. User. Simmons. Admin root. She still had access. Ravi hesitated, then opened Slack. He hovered over the message box. Typed. Deleted. Typed again. Hi Charlotte, sorry to bother you. I think I found something you wrote. It's holding more together than we realized. I hope you're doing okay. Not sure if this is still your number. Then hit send. Across the city, Charlotte saw it, let the notification linger on her screen. Then closed it, not from anger, not from pride, but because the system itself was already answering, in crashes, in failures, in the sudden silence where her code used to hold the weight. The next morning, Brightform's live demo collapsed. Midway through, graphs stopped loading. The client's CTO asked about report discrepancies. No one had an answer. Jason's voice faltered. Marcy tried to patch in real time but couldn't find the entry points. Ravi sat in the back, quietly sweating. When the call ended, the CEO, Everett, turned slowly toward the team. He didn't yell, he just asked one question. Who fixed it last time? Jason opened his mouth, but said nothing. Ravi cleared his throat. I think it was Charlotte Simmons. Everett frowned. Who? Charlotte. She was on infrastructure. Let go during the reorg. A long silence. Then Everett turned to Marcy. Why didn't we keep her? She didn't answer. Because the truth was simple. They didn't know who was really doing the work. Everett clenched his jaw. Find her. Offer whatever she wants. That night, Charlotte didn't answer their email. Didn't return their LinkedIn messages. Because sometimes, silence speaks louder than any yes. Charlotte didn't respond to the email. Not that day. Not the next. The subject line sat unread in her inbox. Urgent. Request for consultation. Immediate infrastructure support. It came from Everett's direct address. The man who once walked past her desk every morning without a glance, now practically begging for her return. Attached was a formal offer, twice her old salary. Remote flexibility. Autonomy over the infrastructure she built. It was written with the desperation of someone who had finally realized what they lost, but far too late to deserve it. She read it once, then again, then quietly closed her laptop. It wasn't that she didn't feel vindicated. She did, but it wasn't sweet, it wasn't warm, it was, still, because what changed wasn't them. It was her. The silence that followed inside the company was heavy. No announcement, no updates, just an absence of control wrapped in polite panic. Systems continued to falter. Another dashboard error. A timeout cascade during a client import. Silent background tasks returning null values. And no one could fix them. Marcy dug deeper, pulling old logs, combing through server notes. She traced the majority of the hidden fixes, those undocumented patches, to one recurring pattern. Manual overrides built off system. Held together by grit and foresight. CS. Always CS. The deeper she looked, the clearer it became. Charlotte wasn't just a reliable engineer. She was the architect of stability. A ghost coder who had mapped the fractures long before they cracked. Everett assembled a war room. Marcy, Ravi, Jason, a few senior leads. Tension hung in the air like static. "We've contacted her," Everett said. No reply. "She's watching," Marcy replied, just not saying anything. "Do we escalate the offer?" Jason shifted awkwardly. "It's not about the money anymore." Everyone knew he was right. Across the city, Charlotte was having coffee at her favorite quiet shop. Dim lighting, jazz humming low. The barista handed her a drink without asking her name. She liked it that way. She checked her phone. 2 new LinkedIn messages. One from Toby, a former project coordinator. Another from Gwen, someone from sales she barely remembered. "Hey, there was a closed-door meeting. They're freaking out. They said if we don't get you back, we could lose Brightform." She stared at the screen, took a sip of her drink, then muted the app, because suddenly, she didn't need them anymore. By the end of that week, 5 engineers had resigned. Ravi was the first. No drama, no grand speech, just a simple message. "Thanks. Learned a lot. Time to build somewhere new." Then came Julia, one of the few who had stayed silent when Charlotte was let go. Her exit email hit different. It went company-wide, unintentionally viral. "We used to build for the future. Now we're duct taping the present. I didn't join this company to lie to clients about uptime. I'm done." That line echoed in quiet corners of the building. People whispered about it in break rooms. Passed screenshots between departments. The board started asking questions. Why are our best engineers leaving? Why are clients walking? Why weren't these risks logged? And the answer kept circling back to one thing. They let Charlotte go. Not because she failed. Because they didn't see her. And by the time they realized it, she had already walked away. On the Monday of her second week consulting with a new firm, Horizon Stack. A clean, sharp, ethics-first infrastructure startup. Charlotte sat in a glass-walled office overlooking the bay. No politics, no Slack noise, just a whiteboard and a team that listened. At noon, the company celebrated a small milestone. Nothing big, no cake, just a moment of stillness where Clara, the CEO, looked at her and said, "We hit this milestone because we built right. Because we started with trust. And Charlotte, you made that possible." The room applauded, not loud, but genuine. Charlotte didn't cry. She didn't beam. She just nodded, because something had shifted. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Back in her old company, the spiral accelerated. Brightform pulled out, quietly, professionally, permanently. The revenue drop was catastrophic. Internal tools glitched daily. Engineers burned out. Leadership was still directionless. And then one day, Everett found a message forwarded to his inbox. It was a blog post from Circuit Weekly. Title: "The Engineer They Let Go, and the Collapse That Followed." Charlotte's name wasn't directly quoted, but everyone knew who the piece was about. It chronicled how one silent woman held together a billion-dollar backend, went unrecognized, and was fired days after saving it. It showed log entries, screenshots, even a Slack thread where someone typed, "I know it was you," and deleted it before sending. The article exploded. Hundreds of comments, thousands of shares. Quiet engineers from around the world responded. "I've been her. This story is mine too. I thought I was the only one." Everett closed his laptop slowly, then stared out at the skyline. He hadn't just lost a developer. He'd lost the soul of the system. Charlotte didn't post anything, didn't comment, didn't tweet. She didn't have to. The system was speaking for her now, through every bug, every resignation, every panicked offer email that landed in her inbox days too late. Then came a different message. No desperation, no groveling, just respect. From Clara Tran, CTO at a major competitor. "Hi Charlotte, I hope you're well. I wanted to ask if you're open to a short-term consulting project. We're rethinking our infrastructure and want someone who builds quietly and brilliantly." You came to mind immediately. Charlotte stared at the message, read it again, and smiled, not from revenge, but from recognition. This was a new beginning, one on her terms. She didn't respond immediately, because sometimes, the most powerful answer is silence. And now, they were the ones learning how to listen. 3 weeks after Charlotte declined her old company's desperate offer, Her inbox dinged with a new subject line. Referral from Clara Tran. She nearly missed it. Buried between newsletter spam and system alerts she still hadn't unsubscribed from. But the name caught her attention. Clara was known for being sharp, practical, and famously allergic to corporate nonsense. Years ago, they'd worked briefly on a client migration together. Charlotte had handled the back end. Clara the exec meetings. They weren't friends. Not really. But there had been mutual respect. The email was short, direct. Hi Charlotte. I wanted to connect you with a company called Helix Point. They're building something clean, scalable, and quiet. The founder, Lior Reyes, is looking for a CTO who doesn't want flash, just integrity. I told him about you. Hope you don't mind. Clara. No attachments, no pitch decks, no flattery. Just an invitation. Charlotte read it twice, then again slower. She wasn't sure why her hands trembled slightly as she typed her reply. Would be open to a conversation. That same afternoon, her phone rang. Lior didn't waste time. He didn't try to sell the company. He just said, I've read about what happened. Not the blog post, your logs. I asked Clara for access to some of your archived work. I didn't just see code, I saw restraint. I saw care. I saw architecture that doesn't demand attention because it doesn't break. Charlotte was quiet. Then he asked, do you want to lead? On your own terms? They met 3 days later. In person. No office. Just a local tea shop near the coast. Lior was in jeans and a hoodie. Charlotte wore the same jacket she'd left her old company in. No resumes were exchanged. Just stories. He laid out the offer plainly. Chief Technology Officer. Equity. Complete autonomy over systems architecture. No VC pressure to scale unsustainably. A culture of ethics before hype. We don't want to be flashy. We want to last. Charlotte listened carefully. She didn't rush her response. When he paused, she looked at him and said something she didn't even realize she'd been holding in. I'm not here to prove myself anymore. If I join, it's to build something no one has to rescue at 3 a.m. Lior smiled. Then we're aligned. By the end of that week, she signed. No press release. No announcement. Just a clean PDF. A signature. And the quiet return of something she thought she'd lost, self-trust. The first day at Helix Point felt like a reset. No awkward introductions. No need to explain what she'd been through. Just a whiteboard with a clean slate and a group of people who asked real questions and actually waited for answers. Her team was small. Noah, a front-end developer with a background in accessibility. Lena, DevOps engineer who valued logs more than dashboards. Jared, fresh out of school, eager to learn, too nervous to interrupt her flow. And they all listened, not to be polite, but because they genuinely wanted to learn. One afternoon, as Charlotte diagrammed the proposed infrastructure model on a whiteboard, Noah said softly, "No one's ever explained things like that before." She didn't smile, not exactly, but something inside her softened. Because for once, her presence was not a threat. It was a foundation. Weeks passed, quietly, productively. Helix Point didn't crash, didn't stumble, they didn't overpromise, they just delivered. By week 4, they'd passed their internal load tests at 10x capacity with zero downtime. By week 6, a healthcare analytics firm signed a pilot contract, specifically citing the stability of the backend as a deciding factor. By week 7, Charlotte found herself doing something she hadn't done in years, sleeping peacefully. No pager duty, no midnight alerts, no band-aid solutions, just clean, thoughtful code, and the freedom to build without politics or performative nonsense. Then came the unexpected. Circuit Weekly published a follow-up article. Title: The CTO Who Didn't Shout, and Still Changed Everything. This time, it was different. They didn't talk about the collapse of her old company. They didn't center the drama. They centered her choices. Leaving without burning bridges. Building with care, not ego. Valuing silence not as absence, but as precision. Quotes from former colleagues appeared anonymously. Some from people who'd once walked past her without a word. She held us together, and we never even looked up. I didn't realize the firewall I relied on was her until it failed. The article ended with a line that landed hard across the industry. When you ignore the quietest person in the room, you don't just risk losing a teammate, you risk losing your system's soul. That post trended for 3 days. And Charlotte? She stayed silent, not out of strategy, but because there was nothing left to prove. A week later, Helix Point hit another milestone: stable architecture across 5 global regions with 0 regressions. They had a team lunch, nothing big. Sandwiches, laughs, low music. At one point, Lior raised his glass to Charlotte for building not just the system, but the reason we can trust it. The team clapped, not like fans, but like fellow builders, people who knew what it meant to stay up late and get it right. Charlotte didn't blush, didn't deflect. She simply said, "Here's to systems that don't need heroes, because they're built right the first time." Outside, the sky was soft with evening light. Charlotte zipped her coat, slipped her hands into her pockets, felt the familiar shape of an old USB drive tucked deep in the lining. Legacy root.zip. She didn't need it anymore. Not as leverage, not as proof, but she hadn't thrown it away. Some things you keep, not for revenge, but as a reminder of where you've been, of what you survived, and of who you've become. By the 3rd month at Helix Point, Charlotte no longer thought about survival. Her days weren't spent extinguishing fires or writing invisible code no one would read. Now, her hours were filled with purpose, designing systems that breathed on their own, training a team that actually cared, and mentoring junior developers who saw her not as a resource, but as a guide. The shift hadn't been loud. It wasn't a cinematic moment of realization. It was gradual, like a sunrise behind clouds, the kind of light that doesn't demand attention but changes everything. At first, she hesitated to lead too boldly. Old habits don't vanish overnight. She was used to being overlooked, being the safety net under someone else's spotlight. So even with the title of CTO, she caught herself second-guessing whether to speak up in meetings or whether her architectural ideas were too opinionated. But something was different this time. No one tried to silence her. No one rolled their eyes when she diagrammed fallback protocols in detail. No one skipped over her suggestions in favor of flashier ideas. They listened. They asked follow-ups. And more than once, they implemented her decisions, without revision, without ego, without question. One afternoon, Charlotte stayed late, not because she had to, but because she wanted to refactor an older script she'd rushed earlier that month. She sat with a hot tea, hoodie sleeves pulled over her hands, music humming faintly in the background. Outside, the city lights flickered, a kind of digital calm that mirrored the environment she was finally part of. Just as she was committing the changes, a knock came at the glass. It was Jared, the junior developer she'd been mentoring. He looked nervous. "Hey, do you have a second?" Charlotte nodded, motioning him in. Jared fidgeted with a USB in his hand. "I know it's late, but I wanted to say something. I've been struggling with imposter syndrome. I keep thinking I'm not fast enough, not smart enough, but watching how you lead, how you think through systems, it helped." Charlotte blinked. "How so?" "You're quiet," he said, "but not afraid. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You gave me permission to just be me here." Charlotte didn't have a polished answer. She just smiled and said, "Quiet doesn't mean small. Sometimes it means precise. That's a strength." Jared exhaled. "Thank you. I needed that." That moment stayed with her. Not because it was flattery, but because it was true validation, from someone who saw her as she was, not as she had to become to survive. She thought back to the girl she used to be, the one who spent nights fixing memory leaks no one else would even notice, who once paused before clicking send, because she feared her ideas were too technical, too much. The one who stayed silent in meetings where people like Jason took credit. And now, she was guiding others away from that fear. That was the real growth, not just the change in scenery, but the change in ownership. Charlotte no longer asked herself, "Do I belong? Will they listen? Is this too much?" Instead, her inner voice had evolved into something firmer, steadier. "This is worth building right. Their pace doesn't define my impact. I can lead without noise, and still be heard." Her confidence wasn't bravado. It was earned calm. The kind that comes from surviving what tried to break you, and learning how to walk forward without carrying the weight of it. But the past has a way of circling back, not to haunt you, but to remind you of how far you've come. It came in the form of an email from Ravi. Hey Charlotte, I'm not with them anymore. A few of us left after Brightform walked. You probably already know, but they're still trying to stabilize. I don't blame you for walking away. I think about that night all the time. Just wanted to say, I see it now. All of it. Thank you. She didn't cry. She didn't reply right away either. She let the words settle like morning fog, gentle and slow. Then she wrote back, thanks, Ravi. I'm glad you got out. Some systems aren't worth patching. Weeks later, Charlotte was invited to speak at a private panel on ethical infrastructure and quiet leadership. She almost declined. Public speaking wasn't her thing. But Noah gently nudged her. People like us need to see someone like you on that stage. So she said yes. The room was small, intimate, a mix of developers, tech founders, and a few VC scouts looking for the next brilliant mind. Charlotte didn't try to impress them. She didn't come with slides or statistics. She came with a simple truth. System integrity isn't just about code. It's about who you choose to be when no one is watching. Invisibility is dangerous when used as a reason to undervalue someone. I used to think being quiet made me replaceable. But I've learned silence is often the most accurate signal of strength. You don't need to shout to matter. But you do need to believe, deeply, that your work has weight. Even if the room doesn't clap for it. The applause was soft, but real, and in that moment, Charlotte finally understood what growth looked like. Not louder, not sharper, just unshaken. Later that night, she walked through the city alone. The same skyline she once feared losing now glowed with possibility. She passed the tower of her old company. The lights were still on. People still inside, chasing fixes, rushing releases, trying to rebuild a system they had gutted with neglect. She didn't look up. She didn't slow down. She didn't carry bitterness anymore. She carried boundaries. Because growth, Charlotte had learned, isn't about proving them wrong. It's about proving yourself right, quietly, deliberately, and completely. It began with a line of code. One Charlotte typed in the quiet hours of the night. Long before her title ever changed. Long before anyone remembered her name. She hadn't written it to be clever. Or to earn applause. She'd written it because it needed to be done. Because something was breaking. And she had the ability to hold it together. Years later, she would still remember that line. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't elegant. But it worked. And that was Charlotte's legacy. Not brilliance for the sake of recognition. But brilliance in service of stability. At Helix Point, months into her role as CTO, that stability became her compass. Not just in architecture, but in leadership. Her team didn't operate on fear or urgency. They didn't idolize burnout or equate late nights with loyalty. They built slowly, thoughtfully, sustainably. Charlotte led every stand-up with a single sentence. What you build today should protect someone tomorrow. And her people listened. By Q2, Helix Point had landed their first major enterprise client, a logistics platform needing real-time data synchronization across 5 global regions. The workload was massive, expectations were high, but for the first time in her career, Charlotte wasn't worried, not because it would be easy, but because she wasn't alone. She had a team that documented, debugged, questioned, and took pride in the smallest of tasks. Not for praise, but because they understood what invisible work really meant. One night, while reviewing logs from a new deployment, Charlotte noticed a patch someone else had submitted, Lena, her DevOps engineer. The patch was subtle, clever, and undocumented. Just a small inline comment. #silent fix. Hold until next rollout. Charlotte stared at it and smiled. She didn't flag it. She didn't correct it. She added one line beneath. #appreciated. Meanwhile, back at her former company, the unraveling continued. They still hadn't hired a stable CTO. Infrastructure teams rotated quarterly. Bugs resurfaced, disappeared, and came back again under new names. None of the patches held long. At one point, someone had dug up old log files to reverse engineer a broken module. And there, buried in thousands of lines, they found a pattern of silent commits. each with a faint watermark. CS admin. Root. Someone in the room muttered. She's still here. But she wasn't. Not really. The code was. The memory was. But Charlotte had long since walked away, and taken the soul of the system with her. At Helix Point, something else began to shift. Charlotte wasn't just building platforms anymore. She was being asked to advise others. Startups began reaching out. Founders messaged her on LinkedIn. She was invited to panels and summits. Not as a symbol of revenge, but as a symbol of resilience. One email came from a small startup based out of Toronto. We don't want growth hacks or overnight launches. We want what you build, quiet, strong systems. Would you mentor our team? Charlotte hesitated at first. Mentorship felt like a big ask. She was still learning how to lead without carrying the world. But then she remembered Jared, her junior dev, and how just one conversation had shifted something in him. She said yes. The impact was quiet, but it rippled. In company after company, engineers started using terms like ethical infrastructure, resilience-first design, and silent code integrity. It wasn't a movement. It wasn't branded, but it was spreading, like clarity in fog. Charlotte didn't see herself as a leader of a philosophy. She just wanted the next generation of builders to know. You don't have to be loud to be respected. You don't have to be visible to be powerful. You don't have to burn out to matter. One day, as she closed her laptop after a long but satisfying week, Charlotte received a handwritten letter. Not an email, not a DM, a letter. It came from a university computer science student. The envelope was simple, no return address, just a note that read, I don't know you personally, but I saw your name in an article shared by my professor. I always thought I had to be the loudest person in the room to get ahead. But after reading your story, I realized I can lead with precision, not noise. I'm staying in engineering. Thank you. Charlotte stared at the paper for a long time, then placed it gently in her desk drawer, right next to the old USB drive she hadn't touched in months. Legacy root.zip. She no longer needed it as proof. But she kept it, not as leverage, but as memory, of who she used to be, of what she carried, of how far she'd come. Weeks later, at Helix Point's Internal Ethics Summit, Charlotte was asked to give a short closing speech. She stood at the front of a modest room filled with developers, product leads, interns, and infrastructure architects. She didn't use slides. She didn't have talking points. She just said, there's power in being the person who walks into chaos and doesn't raise their voice, but raises the system. There's dignity in doing the work no one claps for, yet everyone depends on. And there is a quiet kind of joy in walking away from what tried to erase you, and becoming irreplaceable elsewhere. The applause didn't explode. It grew, from a soft ripple to a wave. And for the first time, Charlotte stood in the center of it, not shrinking, not silencing herself, but receiving it. Not for the code, not for the survival, but for the growth. The room didn't just see her. They understood her. Outside, dusk rolled over the skyline. Slow and gold. Charlotte walked to the window and looked out, mug in hand. This wasn't redemption. This was arrival. She had finally become the system, resilient, ethical, and built to last. And no one would ever forget that again. You don't have to shout to be powerful. Charlotte's journey reminds us that strength isn't always in volume. It's in integrity, consistency, and quiet resilience. She wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but she was the one who saved the system. Again and again. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because it mattered. And even when she was erased from the roster, her work endured. We often assume success is about being seen. But real impact happens in the shadows, where quiet builders hold entire systems, companies, and teams together without applause. And when those people walk away, the silence they leave behind becomes louder than any speech. Charlotte didn't retaliate. She didn't burn bridges. She simply walked forward, and built something better. On her terms. Because sometimes, the most powerful move isn't proving them wrong. It's proving yourself right, quietly, completely. If you've ever felt unseen at work, if you're the person who fixes things silently, holds the project together, or supports the team without needing the spotlight, know this. You are not invisible. You are essential. Don't wait for permission to value your own contribution. Advocate for documentation. Set healthy boundaries. Mentor others who struggle with visibility. And if the system refuses to recognize your worth, don't be afraid to walk away. There's always another place, another team, that doesn't just need your skill, but honors your presence. You don't have to be loud to matter. You just have to be true. Thank you for choosing to listen to this story among thousands of stories out there. Like and subscribe to continue listening to the latest stories.